War has a way of erasing people. Soldiers vanish into mud and smoke, their names etched later into stone. Civilians disappear in the chaos, bombing raids, collapsing buildings, entire streets reduced to rubble overnight. In places like London during the Blitz, it wasn't unusual for someone to simply be gone. And in those moments, there are no questions, only acceptance. Because war explains everything. But what happens when people start disappearing somewhere quiet? Somewhere far from the bombs, far from the front lines. Somewhere nothing is supposed to happen at all. In a small Italian town called Correggio, during the early years of World War II, 3 women vanished. And at first, no one thought much of it. The first woman to disappear was called Faustina. She had lived most of her life alone. By the late 1930s, she was no longer young and in a small town. That carried its own quiet weight. Marriage wasn't just companionship, it was security, identity, and belonging. She wanted a second chance at that life. So when an opportunity came, when someone told her that a man somewhere else was looking for a wife, she believed it. And why wouldn't she? Before leaving, she wrote letters, carefully worded notes to friends and neighbors explaining that she was starting a new life, and then she was gone. And people said, well, good for her. The second was Francesca. She had once been a school teacher, a respectable position, but life had shifted. Money was tight, stability was uncertain, and like many during the war years, she was looking for something steady, something safe. So when she heard about a job opportunity working at a school with a fresh start, she jumped at the chance. Just like Faustina, she also wrote a series of letters before she left for this new job. Letters that contained reassurance for friends and family. And then, just like Faustina, she disappeared. And people accepted it, because people were leaving all the time. The third woman to vanish, though, was very different. Her name was Virginia. She had once been an opera singer, not famous and not widely known, but she had lived a life larger than the town that she now found herself in. There was something refined about her, something that suggested that she had seen more of the world. But like many, her circumstances had changed. And then the promise of work came, a respectable position, something fitting her background, and she accepted it. And just like the others, she wrote letters, she packed her bags, and then she left, and she was never seen again. 3 women, all leaving for better lives, all writing letters before they went, and all disappearing without a trace. Individually, each story made sense. Together, they should have raised questions. But this was wartime Italy. Movement was constant. Uncertainty was normal. People didn't always ask where someone had gone, because sometimes they didn't want to know. And yet, something lingered. Because while the letters explained their departures, no one ever heard from them again, not once. It was Virginia's disappearance that finally broke the pattern. And like the others, she had connections, people who were expecting to hear from her. People who noticed the silence. And when she vanished, it didn't sit right. Questions started to be asked. And for the first time, those neat little explanations in the letters and the sudden departures started to feel staged. Investigators began retracing her steps. Who had she spoken to last? Who knew about her plans? Who had helped arrange this opportunity? Again and again, one name resurfaced. A woman in town. Friendly, helpful, and trusted. A person who seemed on the surface completely ordinary. When the authorities confronted her, they expected denial, excuses, confusion, or maybe even outrage. Instead, very calmly, she confessed completely. She didn't stumble over details, she didn't hesitate. In fact, at times, she corrected the investigators on their assumptions, clarifying small inaccuracies as if precision mattered. Later, she would describe her actions in a way that was almost methodical. There was no panic in her words, no visible horror, only process, only purpose, because in her mind, this wasn't senseless violence. It was necessary. Her name was Leonarda Cianciulli, a 46-year-old woman who seemed, by all who knew her, to be stable, dependable, and even kind. She was the sort of person people trusted, the sort of person you could ask for help, advice, and even reassurance. But beneath that surface, she carried something much darker, a belief that had been building for most of her life. Leonarda's childhood was not a gentle one. She later claimed that her mother had never wanted her, that she had been born from violence and treated as a burden from the very beginning, the byproduct of a violent encounter that was unwanted. There was no warmth in her early years, no sense of safety, only resentment. As she grew older, that instability followed her. She struggled emotionally, attempting to take her own life more than once as a young woman. But what shaped her most wasn't just the trauma, it was what she came to believe because of it. At some point in her early life, Leonarda visited a fortune teller. According to her, the reading was precise and terrifying. She was told that she would marry, that she would have children, but that every single one of them would die. At first it may have seemed like nonsense, but then life began to mirror the prediction. Leonarda became pregnant again and again, 17 times in total. And most of the children didn't survive. Miscarriages, illness, infancy deaths, one after another, until only a few remained. To most people, this would be explained by the realities of the time period. But to Leonarda, this wasn't coincidence. It was proof. Proof that she'd been cursed. Over time, that belief hardened. She became increasingly drawn to superstition, fortune tellers, omens, and rituals. The idea that fate wasn't fixed, that it could be influenced, bargained with, and controlled. And then came the war. When her son Giuseppe told her that he was going to enlist, something shifted. Because now, the pattern wasn't in the past anymore. It was about to happen again. She was certain of it. Certain that he would die unless she did something. So she made a decision. If fate demanded a life, she would choose whose. She began carefully, selecting women who were vulnerable, women looking for something better. a husband, a job, a new start. She would offer them exactly what they wanted: hope. Then she would have them prepare to leave, writing letters ahead of time, explaining the sudden departure. When they arrived at her home for the final time, she would welcome them inside, offer them a drink, wait for the right moment, and then she would strike. Afterward, everything became methodical, controlled. She described the process herself in chillingly practical terms. The bodies were cut apart, placed into a large pot, mixed with caustic soda, and heated until they broke down into a thick, dark substance. I stirred it until it dissolved. It became a liquid. There was no chaos in her account, only routine. But she didn't stop there, because to Leonarda, this wasn't just disposal, it was transformation. In the end, the thing that she feared the most didn't happen. His son survived the war. He returned home, which leaves a question that lingers long after everything else. Did he know? Records suggest that he did learn the truth, at least in part. His mother's arrest and trial were very public. The details were impossible to fully hide. But how do you process something like that? That your survival, your life, was in her mind, brought at the cost of others. It's very difficult to find any accounts of his reaction. As for Leonarda, she was not executed. Instead, she was sentenced to prison and later confined to a criminal asylum where she spent the rest of her life. By most accounts, she remained composed, rational in conversation, still convinced, at least in part, that what she had done had meaning. She died in 1970. For many, the confession was already beyond comprehension, but there was one final detail, one piece of the story that transforms it from tragic to something far more disturbing. Because she didn't simply dispose of the bodies, she used them. The remains of the 3 women were turned into soap, and the blood was dried, mixed with flour and chocolate, and baked into cakes. Cakes that were served, shared and consumed by neighbors and visitors, by people who had no idea what they were eating. War explains many things. It explains chaos, it explains loss, it explains why people disappear without answers. But this was far from the bombs, in a quiet town, in an ordinary home, and for a long time no one suspected a thing. Well, that's all from us here at Dark Entertainment. We hope that you've enjoyed the episode, and if you have, please remember to hit the subscribe button, the bell icon for all notifications, but remember to give it a big thumbs up, as this will really help the channel grow. If you wish to contact me, you can drop a comment down below. I aim to answer all of them, or you can find me on X or on Facebook. But if you've got a story that you would like me to tell, a suggestion for the channel, or a location for me to investigate, feel free to drop me an email at dark_entertainment@outlook.com. And remember, stay dark, stay creepy, and always laugh. Ta-ta!